that when we think about fathers and sons, that's where our minds tend to go. But we don't think about fathers and daughters. I'm going to suggest to you that our relationship with our daughters is just as important as our relationship with our sons. And to our daughters, our influence and our impact on them is the most important thing in their life. That's not to dismiss or discount the relationship they have with their mothers. That's a very important relationship, but it's different. It's different. The relationship they have with us is unique. There are some things that God has given us, given you and me, if you're a dad, that he didn't give to your wife. And we are expected to use these gifts that God has given us. We are hardwired. Everything that you need to be a dad is right there. Now, if you're thinking about hardware, software, now we got to work on the software, right? We got to learn some things, and that's the reason we do things like this. But you've got all the hardware. You got everything that you need. Let me just ask, show of hands, how many are dads here? Okay. How many of you, when you held that baby for the first time, felt completely overwhelmed? You can raise your hand. Yeah, honestly, that's the way every dad feels. It is such a huge responsibility. I remember some friends of ours years ago, we were having kids about this. Well, no, we did not have kids yet. They were a little ahead of us in having kids. I remember him telling me, I wish there was just like a book. God would just give us a book that would help us with this. I was thinking, well, he kind of has. I mean, I didn't presume to say, well, hey, you got a Bible, read it, because I wasn't a dad yet. But it's overwhelming. But you've got it. You've got it hardwired in you. God has given you all the tools that you need, and he's given you a book that will guide you and lead you in being a dad. Let me just start with a story. Actually, there is another book besides the Bible I will recommend. Has anyone read this book, Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters? Okay, well, I would, if you have a daughter, even if your daughter is grown, I read this recently, and I've got 2 daughters. I wish I'd read this years and years ago. But this is written by a doctor. Now she has a Christian perspective. The book is not a Christian type book. The publisher wanted a more accessible, book. It's a bestseller. She's been on all the talk shows and everything talking about it. I think she wrote it several years ago. But anyway, they said, we'll give you 1 chapter on God if you'll write this more accessible book. But she's a pediatrician, and she writes from her perspective as a pediatrician. She'll have dads come up to her and say, well, how are you telling us, what do you know about being a father? She says, I know about kids, and I know about girls. I study girls, and I know what they need, and I know what they say about you and how important you are in their life. But she begins the book telling a personal story about her dad having a random conversation with a friend of his. She was midway through undergrad. She wanted to be a doctor. She wanted to go to med school. But she was filled with a lot of self-doubt and insecurities about whether she could do it. And she overheard her dad, and he doesn't even remember this conversation, speaking with a friend and saying, yeah, in a couple of years, my daughter's going to go to medical school. That seems like a really just simple, kind of matter-of-fact statement. Yeah, in a couple of years, my daughter's going to go to medical school. It was imprinted on her mind. She heard her dad say, I believe in her. That's the power that you have. That's a gift God has given you. And if you're like me, you feel like, I'm not sure I deserve that, right? We feel totally unworthy to have such a powerful influence on this little girl to just make a simple statement like that and it completely alter the course of their life. But that's the power that we have. And so I've stolen, if you have, does everyone have one of these? I've stolen a lot of these points from her book. And the first is kind of a foundational point of what daughters need from their fathers. She needs a hero. What our daughters need is a hero. And you say, well, I'm not a hero. Again, this is an authority that your daughters give you. You have a naturally deeper voice than your wife does. You're more physically imposing than your wife is. And you're just a man. You're different than your daughter. And she knows that. Children pick up on the differences between men and women very early in their childhood development. She knows that. And that is a responsibility. Those gifts that God has given us, those natural gifts, the hard wiring, is a responsibility God has given us. Genesis 18 and verse 19. I have chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. So, how many guys have daughters? Okay. There's a difference between your daughters and your sons, right? It's not that we love one more than the other. Again, kind of like the way they view their moms and dads different, the way we see our kids is different. Who is more likely and more capable of manipulating you? Your son or your daughter? It's totally your daughter. And we understand why that is. Because our son, we know what he's doing. Like, we can see it a mile away and we're like, suck it up, stop complaining. But it's harder to do that with your daughter. Because the first time that she looks up into your eyes and says your name, Daddy, the first time she says, I love you, and it's not that you don't have similar feelings from your son, it's just different. It's just different. And as dads, we want to be the good guy. We don't want to say no. We don't ever want to disappoint her because we cherish and value that relationship so much. But what does she need? I have chosen him that he may command his children. That doesn't mean we're a dictator. Doesn't mean we just boss them around and treat them like dirt. What it means is God is calling on you and me to be the authority in her life, to be the hero. And what do heroes do? What do superheroes do? They save people, right? We have this conversation, we'll talk about this with fathers and sons, this conversation between a father and a son in Proverbs 1 through 9. What's the father doing through all of these chapters in Proverbs 1 through 9? He's trying to save him. He's trying to protect him. He's saying, look, son, here's the way the world works. There's some bad people in the world that they're going to act like they're your friends. They're not your friends. They're going to act like they love you. She doesn't really love you. He's trying to protect his son. Our daughters need that too. I think we have an easier time telling our sons what the rules and what the boundaries are. We have a harder time with our girls, but that's what they need and that's what they want, even when they're saying they don't want it. Meg Meeker talks about her dad, who's a very quiet man, kind of introverted, kind of nerdy, that he would give her boyfriends a really hard time, sent several of them home. She tells one experience when, and this is way before cell phones existed, that he had told her boyfriend, here's the curfew, here's when you need to be home. Well, the curfew came and went and she wasn't home, And so he knew, he had asked before, where are you going? He knew the restaurant that they were going to. And so he paged her at the restaurant. And she was told, here's the phone. And he said, you need to come home. And when she came home, he had a little talk with the boyfriend. Well, imagine how she felt. She felt embarrassed, horrified that her father would do something like this, right? Got really mad at him. That relationship kind of broke off, as you can imagine, but she continued seeking him and pursuing him. She went to his apartment later, and guess who came to the door? Another girl. And she found out that there was still another girl besides this girl, that this guy didn't love her, didn't care about her. Dad could see it. She couldn't. He was the bad guy. All right? That's what our daughters want. That's what they need. She talks about, she'll hear girls complain about, and this is something girls will do with their girlfriends. They'll talk about how mean their dad is, how strict he is. And she said, if you listen closely, it sounds like they're complaining, but you know what they're really doing? They're bragging. They're bragging because that's how they perceive love. Their dad cares enough about them that he is tough with her. He is strict with her. Okay? I included this passage here, 1 Peter 4, 3 and 4. For the time that is past suffices for doing what the Gentiles want to do, living in sensuality, passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. With respect to this, they are surprised when you do not join them in the same flood of debauchery, and they malign you. I mean, I think there's a time for us, and we do need to reason with our kids, especially as they get older, especially as they become teens. We need to give them the tools to make wise decisions for themselves, because they're not always going to be under our roof. But there do need to be some non-negotiable rules, that this is the rule, and I'm sorry that this means that you can't go to this party. I'm sorry this means you can't date this guy anymore. I'm sorry that this means that you're not going to look like everybody else. I'm sorry that means that you're not going to have the phone as early as you wanted, or the social media access as like all your friends do. I'm sorry, but this is the rule. And we need to be the bad guy. It doesn't need to be our wife. I think too often in our home it was Adrienne, my wife, who was the bad guy. And sometimes she would be saying, hey, I need some help over here. I'm the one that ought to be the bad guy. So this is a class. I know I've been monologuing. Thoughts or comments to this point? This is kind of the hub of, we're going to come back to this idea. Any thoughts or comments up to this point? As you think about things, just raise your hand, stop me at any point. All right, so what else does she need? She needs our love, and this is expressed in different ways. It's expressed with words. We don't use words as much as our wives do. There's going to be another class in September later this year, what daughters and sons need from their mothers. Our wives are much better with words than we are. But that is not an excuse for us. We need to express with words how we feel about our daughters. They need to hear from us that we love them. They need to hear from us that we value them, that we're proud of them, even when they mess up. What kind of church was the church at Corinth? Was that the kind of church where, you would just be effusive with praise and compliments, and they're doing all these things well? I mean, Corinth was messed up. I mean, it was kind of the rebellious teen of all the churches that Paul had to deal with. But look at how he begins, 1 Corinthians 1, 4 and 5. And just think about all the problems that Paul addresses in the first letter to Corinth. I mean, they got, you name it, they had it as far as problems were concerned. But look at how he begins. I give thanks to my God always for you, because of the grace of God that was given you in Christ Jesus. And notice how specific he is in giving thanks, that in every way you're enriched in him in all speech and all knowledge. What's he doing? He's praising them. He's thanking God. He's praising God. But do you understand how that makes them feel? Appreciated? What they're doing in the Lord? That it matters to Paul? And he expresses that. He doesn't just take for granted that, well, they know that I feel that way. They know that I thank God for them. No, he says it with words. We need to say that with words, especially when our girls are struggling. And they're going to go through struggles. And we need to be the bad guy who comes in and says, look, this is the way it's going to be because I love you too much. But when they mess up and then when they fail, we need to let them know that we're never going to stop loving them. And they need to hear that with words, not just understand that. Is expressed by boundaries. I love that this is a dad move. The book of Judges begins in chapter 1 with Caleb. You know who Caleb is? One of the two spies who said, we can take the land because God is able to give us the land. After Joshua dies and the tribes are left to go and possess the land, Caleb does his job. He was promised that region. He takes it. But then he says, he who attacks Kiriath Sepher and captures it, I will give him Aksa, my daughter, for a wife. What's that all about? What's he doing there? And this is a very dad move, by the way. What's he doing? What kind of man is going to be married to his daughter? Someone who is a lot like him. He's ensuring that the man who ultimately marries his daughter is going to have the faith in God that he has, the courage to do the right thing, which a lot of people in chapter 1 didn't have the courage to do it. He finds Othniel, the first judge. Isn't that interesting? All right, so by setting these boundaries, he wasn't going to let just anybody marry his daughter. By setting these boundaries, he was ensuring that his daughter would be taken care of spiritually. Okay? It's demonstrated through listening. Proverbs 20 and verse 5. The purpose in a man's heart is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out. All right, so I would tell Adrian, and I'm not saying something negative about Josh. I'm just saying that Josh is a man, like all of us, okay? I would say to Adrian, Josh is not like Anna and Katie, right? If he says this is how he feels, then that's it. That's how he feels. You don't need extra explanation. But you and I both know, those of us who have daughters, when your daughter says something, what do you have to do? Is that it? No, there's more. There's more there. There's layers. With us, it's just what you see is what you get, right? We're not that complicated. Now we're more complicated than that. I'm not. I understand. You know, we as guys have our own layers as well. It's just there's a total nother layer of complexity when it comes to girls. And we can't just say, well, that's what she said, you know, that's enough. And just going back to our job or our business or whatever we're doing. No. The first question needs to be followed up by another question. And the second question needs to be followed up by another question. And after question, after question, after question, after maybe even hours of talking, you finally get down to what the core issue is. Why are they like that? I don't know. That's just the way God made us, or made them, women. It's not easy. Is it easy to understand your wife? If we were honest, I can see the smirks, right? It's not always easy to understand our wives. They're different than us. We've got to listen. And listening is not just a matter of getting to what the problem is so we can fix it. What are we doing? What are we saying to our girls when we spend the time to listen to them and try to understand their feelings?
That we care.
That we care. And the more we prove to them that we care, guess what? The more they're willing to open up and share with us what's going on. We got to listen as dads. It's demonstrated by time. This is, of course, connected with what we just talked about, making the best use of the time because the days are evil. This is not the Greek word chronos, which is like hours in a day. This is the Greek word that talks about seasons. How many seasons do you get with your kids? Those of you who have kids who have grown and left the home, how many seasons do you get? Those seasons go by fast. You know, that little toddler is soon a little girl, is soon in school, is soon in preteen, teenage years, and then they're gone, right? You know, the whole sands in the hourglass. I heard about a guy that he would keep a jar in his shop, and in that jar were marbles. He put exactly how many marbles, each marble represented a weekend that he had with his kids. And so every weekend he'd take a marble out. And it was a visual thing. He could see it, right? We only have so much time with our kids. We got plenty of time to do all these other things that we feel like we just have to do, right? We only get one shot. How do kids spell love? T-I-M-E. That's how they spell love. It's a 4-letter word. T-I-M-E. We have to demonstrate, not just with words, but also with actions. Okay? What's preventing us from spending time with our kids? You tell me. What are some things? I want to make this more interactive.
Careers.
Okay. We're very busy. We're very, very busy. Was Jesus busy? I can't think of anybody more busy than Jesus. Mark chapter 10, there's a blind guy on the side of the road named Bartimaeus. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. What were the disciples saying to Bartimaeus? Jesus is way too important for a blind beggar like you, right? But he doesn't stop. He just keeps crying out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. The text says Jesus stopped. He was busy. He had a lot of things to do, a lot of people coming to him, a lot of people demanding things from him. Jesus stopped. For who? A blind beggar. How important are our girls or boys? This applies either way. When our kids know that we're busy, they understand. And I think our kids are very forgiving. I think they're willing because they understand that we have important jobs and we have important responsibilities. But when they see us close the laptop, put the phone down, and stop everything to see about their needs, what's that communicating to them? The same thing that was communicated to Bartimaeus from Jesus, right? We have to demonstrate that with real sacrifice. So our jobs, honestly, our leisure, we got time for a lot of things that are not necessary. You can make all kinds of rationalizations for how important your job is, but when it comes to leisure, we sacrifice a lot to go fishing or hunting or playing sports, watching sports. We have the time. It's just, what are we going to prioritize? I've gotten behind in the clicker. It's demonstrated by our will. 1 Corinthians 13, speaking of the troubled adolescent rebellious church, Paul says in verse 7, 1 Corinthians 13, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. There was another story in the book about a lady that when she was, I'm not going to remember all the details, so I could be misquoting this, but she had had some troubles with drugs, alcohol, something like that. And her parents were going to send her away to a treatment program. It had gotten that bad. And there was some event that had happened during the week that was just like, this is the nail in the coffin. This is what's going to happen. They made the decision. She's got to go. But before she left, her dad said, go pack your things, get in the car, we're going to go camping. She didn't want to go camping. But they drove 4 hours to an island off the coast. And the whole time they were in the car, not a word was said. The whole weekend that they camped out, there was no conversation. Nobody had a good time. He didn't enjoy it. But when she looks back now, years later, she says, that was the turning point for me. She knew that her dad was going to stay with her. He was demonstrating, I want to help you. I want to save you. And I'm willing to suffer through this with you, whatever it takes. I'm not going to leave you. Again, and this goes back to the first point, she needs a hero. And we've got to be willing to do whatever it takes to help our daughters. We've got to show that will by bearing all things, believing all things, hoping, and enduring all things. Other thoughts on that before we turn the page? All right, she needs your humility. What do you do when your daughter isn't the most beautiful, doesn't make the team, doesn't come in first place? And the verse I give here is Genesis 29:17. Poor Leah. Her eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Imagine if those two sisters had Instagram. Right? And that's what that whole platform is designed to do, is to create this comparison game that every girl is dealing with. You understand that things like depression and anxiety being expressed in harmful behaviors like anorexia, bulimia, are at an epidemic level right now. I mean, this has always been a problem for girls, but in the last 15 years, since the iPhone came out and social media apps, that girls are getting taken to the ER at increasing rates every year. So what is our role in this? I mean, I understand that there's got to be some talks about social media and there's got to be some talks about phones, but you can't get away from the fact that there's going to be comparisons made. Your daughter's not going to, she's the most beautiful girl in the world to you, but objectively, she's not going to be the most beautiful girl in every situation. She's not always going to make the team. She's not always going to have the best grade. She's not going to compare in measurable ways to her peers the best. How do you handle that as a dad? And I would suggest to you that what we say to her is more important than anybody, even than what her mom says to her. This is not just a talk mom needs to have. What do you say? What would you say if your daughters were Rachel and Leah? And by the way, this gets even worse because it's not just the comparison between looks. What becomes the competition later? Children. They even start naming their children after the competition. All right? So Dad, what do you do? How do you help them? Help me out here.
That
You should have given this talk to Laban.
Ed
You
first.
should have given this talk to Laban.
What are you thinking? Seriously, you think this is going to work out?
reinforce their self-worth,
Yeah.
yourself. Let them know who they are in your eyes.
And what makes them valuable to you? What makes them valuable?
The spirit has no physical appearance.
Yeah.
Their spirits are beautiful.
Yeah,
And that's the emphasis.
right. We look at our daughters, ideally, the same way God looks at us. What does God see? Man looks at the outward appearance. God looks at the heart. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair, the putting of gold, jewelry, clothing you wear. Let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of what? A gentle or meek and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. We've got to communicate that to our girls. But even beyond that, when you see other girls doing things that you can't do, what should the Christian's response be to seeing someone who has talents, who has abilities, who has gifts that you don't have? What should the Christian response be? If it's not comparison and, oh no, she's getting ahead of me. What should our response be? What should Rachel have been doing when she found out that Leah was having a baby? What do you do when someone's having a baby? You thank God. We're envying the gifts that God has given us. Don't be jealous of her because she's prettier than you, or because she's more talented than you, or she has better grades than you, or she's more charismatic, or whatever it is. Be thankful. And oftentimes the girls are not envious of the people that they don't know. Now I know in Instagram that can change. But who are our girls most envious of? The people, and not just the people they know, but the people they know really well. It's oftentimes a sister, right? It's the closest person to them. I mean, I'll just share with you this story. We had a devotion one night on Leah and Rachel. And one of my daughters, I won't say which one, Josh knows, but I won't say which one. One of my daughters came downstairs and she was crying and she said, "I'm Leah. My sister is prettier than me." Now, is that the way I feel? Of course not. Both of my daughters are equally beautiful in my eyes. But those are teachable moments. Those are moments where you as a dad need to step in and show them, yes, you're beautiful, you're valuable, you're talented. God has given you all these blessings. But that's not even the most important thing, is it? The most important thing is this is about God. This is not about us. This is about how God sees us, right? And we're trying to communicate through our reaction how God sees them, because that's what we ultimately want them to do. What we want for all of our kids, our girls and our boys, is for them to be independent of us and dependent on God. That's the ultimate goal. And so we can create and reinforce the things that God has communicated about us in the way we react to these situations. So she needs humility. You're not going to read this in self-help books, by the way, right? Everything about our culture is you're the most wonderful person in the world. There's just going to be some things that our kids are not good at, and that's okay. We don't have to be the best at everything, and it's better we don't lie to your kids. Don't tell them, "Oh well, the coach shouldn't have cut you. You're way better than that kid. You should be getting a lot more playing time. And, that was just a big mistake that college made by not choosing you." And, victim, victim, victim. That's not what we need to reinforce. That's the spirit of this age, the culture we live in. We need humility. We need to be rooted and grounded in God and the way He sees us. Thoughts or comments on that?
We would need these qualities. If we want her to have these qualities, we need them ourselves. We can't believe that we deserve everything either and feel like we're victims.
That's right. And if they're going to just mimic our perspective on life, that's right. We got to practice these things ourselves. And
When you were talking
Yeah.
about how they might compare themselves to others and view beauty as being so important, and you were talking about like, well, we need to emphasize what's on the inside. I don't have a daughter, but one thing I think about is I want to do it with my wife, though.
Mhm.
And I think I would imagine if your daughter doesn't see you do that with your wife, doesn't see you emphasize the person on the inside and only the outward, I wonder if those words would ring hollow if you try to tell her otherwise.
That's right. Yeah, and this is going to be true with boys as well. They're watching very carefully our relationship with our mates. We had a class recently on child rearing, and the first class was about marriage, not about children. Because the best gift you can give to your kids is a good marriage. That's the best gift you can give to them. We're like in the wagon wheel illustration, the kids are the spokes. The marriage is the hub. You take the hub out, it's not going to work. They depend on us having a healthy, and they're taking cues from us. She's learning, well, this is a later point. Let me just we're not going to have time to cover all these points. She needs you to be the kind of man you want her to marry. And how is she going to learn about what a husband should be? By watching you. I don't want anything less than that. I want what mom has. I love my parents' marriage. I want my marriage to look like my parents' marriage, ideally. That's the way it ought to be. Really good point. Other thoughts?
I don't have a child yet, but there is a phrase that goes around. You're talking about how important the relationship between a girl and a father is. The phrase "she has daddy issues," and that relationship seems to imprint itself when they're looking for a potential spouse based on what they have with their father.
That's right. That's right. She needs your pragmatism and grit. 1 Corinthians 16:13, be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Dr. Meeker, a couple comes in with their little girl, and she's really struggling with something, maybe anorexia, bulimia, something like that. But really struggling with something. The beginning of the conversation is mom. And mom will go on for half an hour asking why. Why is she feeling this way? Why is this happening? Why? What have I done? Everything with mom is about trying, and that's not a bad thing. This is the way our wives are wired, right? They're made to think about relationships and the importance of relationships and what have I done to fail my daughter. You know what the dad asks when mom gets finished? Not why, what? What are we going to do? That's all the dad wants to know. It's not that he's not concerned about feelings and emotions. All of that is important to him too. But the way the dad is wired to think, and God has made us this way, is okay, so now what do we do about this? What's the plan? Give me the step-by-step, what we need to do to fix this, right? And girls need that. They need their moms, and boys need their moms. But girls need their dads to say, all right, here's what we're going to do. Here's what the rules are going to be. And, you may not like it, but honey, this thing, it's just got to go. We're going to put this to the side. We're going to get rid of it for a while. Don't know how long that's going to be, but you're going to decide and you're going to say, hey, we're going to just take a complete fast. No phone. That's out of it. No social media. Instagram, no. because you are way more important than this technology. You know, you can live without it, right? But that's what a dad does. He's like, okay, here's the plan. Here's what we're going to do. Let's do it. Let's make this work. She needs that. She needs the comfort and the solace of having someone who cares about her so much, he's willing to stand up to her and be that person to say, here's what we're going to do moving forward. She needs to feel secure. And we already talked about this in the marriage relationship. You know, Matthew 19 and verse 6, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. If anyone here is a child of divorce, I don't have to tell you how difficult that is. It is painful. It is traumatic. It is one of the worst things that a little girl can go through, to see her dad walk away. And by the way, you can say all the right things, and your wife can say all the right things, but when your girl is trying to process this divorce in her own heart, again, like mom before the pediatrician, why? What's the answer to the why in her heart? It's because of me. I mean, that's not right. That's not right. We know that. And you can say that to her. This isn't about you, honey. I love you. Your mom loves you. We love you. You haven't done anything. But you can't convince her of that. She needs to feel secure in the home relationship. Again, the hub and the wagon wheel. But before we break, I'm going to give you a 10-minute break here. She needs God. I asked my daughter Anna, I asked Katie and Anna, I did this lesson summer ago at university, and I asked both the girls, so you tell me what does a daughter need from her dad? They said the same thing. But Anna said something a little different way that really stood out to me. She said, I wish dads would treat their daughters the way that they treat their sons. And what she meant by that, I mean, she meant a lot of things. She explained what she meant by that. Actually, this passage in Luke 10 will explain it. Luke 10:41, the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. You understand what's happening with Mary and Martha. Martha's not just upset because she has to do all the work and Mary gets to do the fun part, sitting at Jesus' feet. That may be part of it, but there's more going on than that. It's hard for us to understand culturally how different Jesus' day was for our own. It was not done. You did not, as a rabbi, have female students. You would only have male students. In fact, I could produce for you some statements from Pharisees about how wicked it is to teach a girl the law. I kid you not. They use strong, I don't have a quote handy, but look it up, what the Pharisees believed about teaching girls. You don't teach them the law. That was for boys. It was for men. And so it was a provocative thing for Mary to be sitting at Jesus' feet along with all the guys. She should be in the kitchen helping Martha. But what does Jesus say? You're anxious, worried, troubled about many things. One thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion. What Anna was telling me, and she was, I hope this doesn't sound self-serving, she was complimenting me. I would take the kids, each kid had a different morning, where I would take them to a coffee shop or a bakery or whatever, and we'd have a little devotion and we'd spend some time together before school. And so they each had their morning. And Anna was like, you are treating me like a boy. You are treating me like a son. You were teaching me the Bible just like you would teach Josh. We celebrate the fact that the boys get up and make talks, and they learn how to lead singing, and they do all these things, and that's growing the next generation of Christians. Do our daughters need to learn the Word of God? Isn't it important that our daughters be taught? Well, of course it is. Who's going to be teaching the next generation? It's going to be mothers. Yes, they need to learn the Word of God. And what Anna was saying is, and the other thing she was saying by that is I said this at the beginning, we're way too soft on girls. We don't treat them the same way. And she probably saw some of that in me. I would be tougher on Josh maybe than I was the girls. But she needs God. That's what our girls need most, and that's what our boys need most. But let's not leave out the girls and miss the incredible opportunity God has given us as fathers to do that. Any final thoughts? I've said everything I probably need to say.
David, as you've been talking, I've been thinking about this idea of comparison, and to just paraphrase Paul, he said to compare ourselves with ourselves is not wise, and I see our job as fathers, really as parents, especially as fathers, to push our children toward wisdom, and that's maturity. We can't stop that. That's a process that continues the whole way through. And to compare yourself with someone else is not wise.
Yeah.
And we need to push them beyond that to maturity, to look at, direct them toward the scriptures. What does God want out of you? That's what you need to compare yourself to.
Amen. Yes.
Not others.
Yep.
And we do that as men too.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just girls on Instagram.
That's right.
You think about when we meet each other, we introduce each other, and what's the first thing that we want to know usually? What do you do for a living?
Yep.
And that's kind of a comparison thing.
Sizing.
Where do I stack up against what you do?
Yep.
If we're honest with ourselves.
Yep.
That's not wise either.
That is right. Good thoughts. Anybody else? All right, let's take a few minutes and we'll come back together.